Good afternoon. It's been almost 2 months since we had a virtual book and author program. I hope you all had a great summer. If you've forgotten or if this is your first time here, my name is Raheem Thompson. I am the manager of public programs. I would like to take a moment and thank you all for joining us for this afternoon's book and author program, The Watchmakers. The Watchmakers is co-written by Scott Lenga and his father, Harry. Using the information he gathered from interviewing his father more than 20 years ago, Scott put together this incredible first-person account detailing his father's and brother's life experiences and survival in World War II. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of speaking with Scott. He's going to do a presentation, but before that, I would like to let you know we will have time for Q&A at the end of the program. But at any point, please submit your questions in the Q&A function, and we will get to as many as we can towards the end. I would like to thank all of our community partners that supported promoting this program. And I will make one more small note. During Scott's presentation, uh, please select the viewing option of side-by-side mode. He will be sharing slides and he will also be speaking simultaneously. Now I pass things off to Scott. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am just going to do a share screen to put my slideshow up. I hope everybody can see it. Let me just put it on slideshow. Okay, great. So, Raheem, can everybody, am I on? Am I live?
Yes. Yep, it
Okay,
looks good.
great. I'm feeling good, Raheem. So I want to first of all thank you all so much for coming. It means the world to me to have these types of events to share my father's story, the story of him and his brothers, and how they survived. I want to make a couple of acknowledgments at the beginning before we get started. This is a particularly resonant event for me because my brother Mark is participating on Zoom, as well as my first cousins Margie and Bobby, who are the daughters of my uncle Morris, who is one of the Lenga brothers that survived with my father. And also Margie's grandchildren, Oliver and Phoebe. So I really appreciate everybody's attendance. And so between me and my brother and cousins and my kids and Margie's grandkids, we have 3 generations of the descendants of my father and his brothers who are here with us. There is one other thing that I wanted to mention. I am humbled and honored to have Linda Osikowicz, Peggy Gianangeli, and Alan Persinger here with us on the Zoom. They are the 3 children of Robert Persinger, who was the U.S. Army sergeant who rode a tank into the Ebensee concentration camp and liberated my father and his brothers along with the other thousands of prisoners of that concentration camp. So it really sends shivers up and down my up and down my spine at the same time as it warms my heart to have them participating in this event and to have their support for the Watchmakers. It really means so much to me and my family. I will start with a quick book intro. I guess some of the people in the audience have read the book, some people have not. The book is The Watchmakers is about a plucky kid, my father growing up in a Jewish family of watchmakers in Poland in the 1920s and 30s. And he and his brothers learned how to fix watches from their father. And later in the war, those watchmaking skills and a promise to stay together at any cost saved their lives and enabled them to survive the concentration camps. The Watchmakers tells the true story of how my father and his brothers um, uh, took harrowing risks to stay together and how they fought to survive. When I was writing the book, I used a very disciplined methodology to preserve my father's voice and his style of communication, and to tell the story only from his point of view. Now that the book is finished, I don't have to do that anymore. So I can read and understand the watchmakers from my point of view, which is a completely different experience. And I have to tell you, it's more interesting than I thought. I I will start with a quick introduction to my father's town, which is called Kozhnitz. It's called Kozhnitz in Polish, but the Jews had Yiddish names for all the towns. And it's a small town. In those years, when my father was growing up, there was a population of maybe 8,000 people, of which more than 50% were Jews. And just to set the context of the 1920s, Kozhnitz is a few hundred miles from the border with the Soviet Union, which was under Joseph Stalin at the time. And there were millions of Jews living in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet government had outlawed all practice of religion. So it completely wiped out any opportunity for those people to practice their religion, and it was a huge threat to the people in Poland, because Poland always had a precarious existence, being invaded from either the West by Germany or other countries in Western Europe, or Russia from the East. The small town of Kozhnitz had only one industry really, which was shoemaking, and most of the people worked in either shoemaking or agriculture. And in this little town, this little nothing town, uh, there were so many diverse ideologies among the Jewish population. There were many Hasidic sects. There were three different Zionist ideologies. There were communists, assimilationists, Bundists, which were socialists who believed that the Jews should stay in Poland and be Jewish socialists in Poland. And all of the people in these groups argued passionately over every imaginable issue. And they lived together as a community that faced existential threats, real and imagined, physical and spiritual, from every direction. My father and his family were Kozhnitzer Hasidim. And as a reader of the Watchmakers, I'm now trying to understand how my father's Hasidic upbringing influenced his choices later in the war, and his general qualities of his personality that enabled him and his brothers to survive. My father had a really tough childhood. His mother died in childbirth when he was just 4.5 years old, and he had a tough relationship with his father. The photo that you see on the screen is a photo of my grandfather Michoel and my father's two brothers. It was taken in 1924, which is the same year that my grandmother had died in childbirth. And it was too much for my grandfather to manage five children on his own. So he followed the advice of his friends to send his boys, his older boys, which are pictured here, off to yeshiva, 100 or so miles away from their home. And this is a photograph where they were saying goodbye and seeing them off to yeshiva. So although everybody looks proud and stoic, it's really a very sad occasion and belies an extremely tragic situation. My father and his brothers had and his sister too, had a tough relationship with their father. He was strict and impatient with them. And as you can imagine, being a single parent, and they had fallen into a cycle of poverty that they could never get out of. And my grandfather Michoel, his way of dealing with the hardship and challenges in his life was to adhere and try and find his way forward through the Hasidic way of life. And one of the features, principles of that worldview is a kind of profound transcendent optimism, which says that no matter what happens, no matter how dark things get in the present moment, um, there has to be salvation. There has to be a way that things are going to get better. So one has to have faith and endure. And I think this is illustrated very well by one of the stories that my father tells in this book. It happened one Friday night, not Friday night, it happened one Friday afternoon that the family had uh, literally no food and not enough money to even buy a loaf of bread. And this wasn't a rare occurrence. This happened many times, but it was especially difficult for them on Fridays because after Friday at sunset, the Jewish Shabbat would start, and it was against Jewish law to buy anything or cook or anything. So if they didn't get some money into the store on a Friday afternoon, and didn't have any money to buy things, they would not have anything to eat over Shabbat. So my father or my grandfather, it so happened that a fellow came in to his store to beg for charity, and I guess my grandfather Michoel took it as a challenge to his faith and religious commitment, and looked poverty and hunger in the face and gave his last coins to this fellow for charity. And the man walked out and he told my father, who was in the store with him, that God would provide. My grandfather Michoel, he thought that he was teaching his son, his kids, as this happened on numerous occasions, how to walk the true spiritual path. But it was really too much for them. It's also something to note that while this was going on in the store, on the other side of the room that also was the store was their home, and he had his kids boil pots of water on the stove so people would see steam coming out of the windows and that they would think that they were cooking for Shabbat. But really, they had nothing, and it was too much for my father, and he had to run out of the store and cried bitter, silent tears, not understanding how his father could leave them with nothing and give away the last coins that he had. Well, it so happened that later in the afternoon, somebody walked into their store with a watch that needed fixing, and it could be fixed right away while he was waiting. And so they fixed this fellow's watch, and he laid down two zlotys on the counter, which was something rare. He didn't even ask what the charge was, and walked out. So they had, in the end, some money to go buy some food for that Shabbat. They had never seen this fellow before. He was a Christian guy, not a Jewish fellow, and they never saw him again, and nobody in the town ever seemed to have seen him either. And so a legend arose within the family that he was actually an angel, or Elijah the prophet, who had come down to earth to reward them and save them from their plight. And my dad said that's really how they thought in those days. And uh, so it's a kind of an interesting story for me, and it has deeper meaning, I think, in light of the rest of my father's story. Of course, the real reward for my grandfather Michoel, not that he got two zlotys to buy himself for food on that Shabbat, but the real reward was that he had four sons that survived the Shoah, the Holocaust. And when I look into the story, I think to myself, well, was it just the you could call it a miracle maybe of this guy showing up, or was it the qualities that gave my grandfather the strength to have that optimism and to have faith that things were going to work out okay? Perhaps, perhaps that was the real magic of what happened that day and happened on many other occasions. And it so happened later in the war, when my father and his brothers were going through the most extreme and dangerous situations, that they encountered a number of unlikely angels who appeared at a critical moment and did something to save their lives. My father relates to the importance of optimism in a YouTube clip that I'm going to show, if you bear with me for a second. So I'm just going to let this play for a minute and a half so you can have my father speak to you and not just me.
The only thing is a miracle. We hope for a miracle.
Perfect.
That's also, we used to say we are still alive. A miracle can happen a minute from now, a day, an hour, you understand, a day, a week, a month. And let's water to keep on going. Because maybe it'll happen in our time before we are finished off. That's all that was in our minds.
That's all you really talked about.
And what more you were convinced, and what, sometimes you can talk yourself to something you believe in it too. You're up for it, A lot of people, hungry people, and they believed that I'm hungry now, but later I'll find something to eat. He can last longer than the one, don't think that way. Thinks, I'm hungry and I won't get any more food. He becomes a pessimist. He dies faster.
You saw it happen.
Yeah, I did see. Yeah, and many times when they gave up. Boys gave up. They said, it's pointless. Pointless, he says, to destroy more and more and more. Give up, we will never come out alive. He was a pessimist. And that is a terrible sickness, pessimism. You destroy yourself. I know that it's possible. You have to have optimism all the time.
So my father just spoke of the importance of optimism, and I want to introduce another archetype from Hasidic stories and literature, and that's an important part of the Hasidic worldview, is the archetype of the fixer. The fixer is a simple Jew who fixes things. And usually in these Chassidic stories, he symbolizes somebody who can look into a dark, broken situation and see something that other people can't see, and sees an opportunity to fix that situation. And it can sometimes be in another person, in another group of people, or maybe even in himself. My father and his brothers were simple fixers. They could fix watches. They learned how to do that from their father, and that's what they did. They didn't talk about philosophy. I never really heard my father, philosophize so much. And he didn't talk about symbolism. And in fact, they drifted from their Hasidic religious roots as young men, even before the war. But as the war came, and my father had to face the brutal oppression of the Nazi regime as they were occupying Poland, he then began to understand that the religious discipline that he had endured as a kid and resented and didn't relate to so much turned out to be a kind of survival training that helped him and his brothers keep their balance in the most extreme situations and even do selfless acts of charity for others. The photo that you see was taken in either late 1941, probably summer of 1941. And I would like to move the discussion to, and this is the photo of my father who's on the left and his best friend, Hamira Salzberg. In September of 1942, the night before the Germans were going to evacuate the town of Kozhnitz and send all of the Jews away and put them on a train, my grandfather got a visit from his friend, who was the captain of the local Polish police. And that police captain gave him a tip that this was going to happen and that if he loved his sons, he should send them away to escape from the town that very night. By the way, this photo that you're looking at is an actual photo of my grandfather's watchmaking shop. On the left, you'll see a sign with a clock on it, and it's got his name written on it. So in a heart-wrenching scene of prayers and tears, my grandfather Michoel sent his boys away with a suitcase full of watchmaking tools and watch parts, telling them that where he was going, he wasn't going to need them. And they escaped that very night. And those watch tools and parts, they were literally tools of survival in the slave labor camps. Even equally, I don't know if equally, but also very important is they were kind of a symbol, a physical connection to their father's tears and prayers, and it gave them strength. So this Polish police captain was one of these unlikely angels. He was, in fact, somebody who was integrally involved in implementing the Nazi occupation of Kozhnitz and enabling the final solution where all these Jews of the town were going to be sent away to Treblinka. But to my grandfather and to my father and his brothers, he was a true friend that in that moment unquestionably saved their lives. And my father, I guess you could say, had another weapon, which was kind of initiative or audacity, chutzpah, I guess you could say, to take those tools that he had and to approach the German guards and slave labor camps. There's a story that I'll tell. There was a guy who was in charge of one of the slave labor camps that he was in. Is an SS guy who was in charge of a work site. And my father saw something in him. He was a terrible sadist who used to beat people even to the point of death for no reason. And my father saw something, some kind of spark of humanity in him, and approached him and said, "I would like to do you a favor." And the guy looked at him and said, "You want to do me a favor?" And he said, I'm a watchmaker, and I would like to have the honor of fixing a watch for you." And the guy said, "Well, you're a watchmaker, so where's your tools?" My father said, "I have tools and I can fix a watch." But, and my father was already sorry that he had started the conversation, because he thought it was going to a bad place and he might be in real trouble, life-threatening trouble. But suddenly this fellow said, "I have a watch, I'll bring it tomorrow and we'll see if you can fix a watch." So the next morning, my father came with some tools, and this SS man took him into a back office and handed him a watch and said, "So can you fix this watch?" And my father took the watch, and he had a feeling that something wasn't right the way this guy was speaking to him. But he asked him for a little knife so he could open the back of the watch. And he opened the back of the watch, and the watch was completely empty. All there was a dial and no moving parts that would be the movement that would make the watch work or be repairable. And he said, my father said that he could feel the intensity of this guy's gaze on him as he asked, "So, can you fix the watch?" And my father, without thinking about it, said yes. Without thinking about it and without knowing if he could fix a watch, but he figured that that was the only answer that was going to keep him alive. So the guy said, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And my father said, "Yes, I can fix this watch. It will take a long time. It might take me 3 months to fix this watch, but I can do it." And so this SS man told him, "You can sit here in this office." It was the middle of winter, and they were working unloading bags of cement. My father knew that if he kept doing that for very long, he would get worn out, and they would kill him. But this SS man told him, "You sit here for as long as you want, but that watch needs to be fixed." So my father took the watch back to his brothers, and they started going through the parts that they had from their father. And luckily, they were able to find a movement that was going to fit the watch. And so from that moment right away, he knew he actually could fix the watch, and he felt like he was in good shape, because for the next 3 months, he sat in that office and worked on the watch and took his time, and had a heater, and didn't have to work outside. And this SS man, who was called Corbinus, he started to bring him other watches from his colleagues, from the other Nazis who were in the camp in the area. And so he made a business out of my father's watchmaking. That was until the camp commandant caught wind of it and told my father, called him out of a lineup on a Sunday where they were selecting people to be shot, and told him that from now on he was going to fix watches for him and not for Corbinus. So my father asked him if he would have a lot of watches to fix, and he said yes. So my father said, "Well, I have 2 brothers who are also watchmakers, and they could help me." So he called them out and gave them a special room where they could sit in the camp and work and sleep and just fixed watches. It saved their lives. And so that's what my father, that became the kind of model that my father used in every camp that he went to approach somebody at the right place and at the right time to tell them he could fix watches for them. And in that way, he and sometimes his brothers were able to fix watches instead of doing that back-breaking, dangerous labor. Until they got to Auschwitz. And on the ramp in Auschwitz, of course, their tools were, those precious tools were taken away from them, along with their body hair and their clothes, and even their names when numbers were tattooed on their arms. And my father's response was to right away find a nail that he could grind down into a watchmaker's screwdriver, and a pair of found an old pair of earmuffs that he took out the spring and formed it into a pair of tweezers that he could use. And with those two tools, he could take apart a watch and put it together and fix it if it needed a cleaning. If it needed parts, he couldn't fix the watch. But even in that place at that time, he had confidence that if he had a couple of watchmaking tools that he could use, he could somehow use them to survive in the same way that he did in the other slave labor camps. The photo that you see, by the way, are not the tools that my father used, but they are tools that were created, that were formed by a Jewish watchmaker in Auschwitz from available materials. And I was able to find the children of this fellow and photograph these tools. And indeed, it turned out that Auschwitz was flooded with watches, because every day they were bringing trainloads of Jews in from all over Europe and plundering whatever they had. And watches were something that the German soldiers and guards could pilfer from the transports of valuables that they were sending back to Germany, and they would trade those watches in the camp. And it turned out that my father and his brothers were able to fix watches for the Germans as well as for the Polish foreman of his barrack. And again, that's the skill that saved their life. But this skill of being able to approach somebody, to find some kind of spark of humanity in the eyes of a murderer and turn it into some ability to practice their profession and be fixers, indeed, was something that opened up a level of humanity in the oddest places and the oddest times within the SS guards that they were dealing with and fixing watches for. But it also happened that at times that my father had to face the darkness within himself. And there's a story that I'll relate very quickly, I hope, that illustrates this. It happened that my father and his brothers were working on opposite shifts in one of the concentration camps. And so my father worked the night shift and his brothers worked the day shift. And at the end of my father's shift, when he got his soup, the guy who was handing out the soup that day was the foreman from his barrack who he had fixed a watch for. So he told my father, if you want an extra bowl of soup, come back and I'll give you one. So my father got this extra bowl of soup, which was like gold for him. It was more valuable than any gold. He was starving to death, and he got this extra bowl of soup. And but he said immediately to himself, "I need to save this bowl of soup to share with my brothers, because they didn't get an extra bowl of soup, and I shouldn't have it for myself." So he spent all day with that soup underneath his bunk bed, guarding it and thinking to himself, well, I could just eat half the soup and my brothers would never know. Or maybe I could eat just one spoonful of the soup. Who would know? But each time he battled with himself and refrained from touching that soup until his brothers came back from their shift. And when they saw the soup, they understood what it meant for him to save that soup for them. And they sat down and passed the bowl around and each one took a spoon at a time and passed it around until that bowl of soup was finished. And my father said that it was such a powerful experience of brotherhood and togetherness that they felt from doing that, and that my father, to this day, of the many things, the many brave things that he did to save his own life, his brothers, the lives of his brothers, and the lives of other people, he in a way was the proudest of saving that bowl of soup and facing his own selfishness and overcoming it in a very extreme situation. So my father and his brothers continued to be fixers, at least until Friday night, May 4th, 1945, when they were completely at the end of their physical and mental capabilities and decided to give up. They decided they were not going to go to work the next day. They were going to lay in their bunk and accept death in the hands of the German guards when they came for the roll call for work. But it so happened that the next morning, May 5th, there was no roll call for work because the German authority in the camp had collapsed. And they gathered their strength to wait because they knew it was the end. And then the next day, on May 6th, Sunday, 2 more angels arrived in the camp. Sergeant Robert Persinger and Sergeant Dick Pamonti rode in 2 United States Army tanks and liberated the camp. I would just like to close with a thought for my talk, and then I'll open it up to questions. I forgot to move the photo. So this is a photo of Bob Persinger on the left, and a photo of him and Dick Pamonti on the upper right, and on the bottom is the Lady Luck, a photo of the Lady Luck, which is the actual tank that entered Ebensee to liberate it on May 6th, 1945. What I'd like to close with is just kind of a sum up that my father and his brothers were regular guys. They're regular guys who made a commitment to their core values and to each other. And time and time again, they did the simple, hard thing when faced with the most extreme situations. And that opened up inside of them a level of tenacity and resilience that they never knew existed. My father and his brothers set a powerful example that calls to the hidden capabilities that exist within all of us. Every day, they struggled to keep a single-minded focus, just to stay together for that day and to do whatever they needed to do to survive. Thank you. I would like to open it up for questions. While we're getting that together, I'll just scroll a couple of additional photos. This is a photo of my father and his brother. My father is closer to the right where the arrow is. His brother Moshe, is closer to the center. This photo was taken on May 8th, just 2 days after liberation, by a U.S. Army photographer. And at that time, my father weighed in at 75 pounds, and his brother Moshe weighed in at 70 pounds. And here are some photos of them in post-war Europe. Another photo that was taken at a reunion at my cousin Margie's wedding, is Morris's daughter. And a photo of my father and his gravestone. So, Raheem, the floor is yours for questions.
All right.
Bring it on.
Thank you for a great presentation, and thank you for joining us today as well. Before we start with our audience Q&A, I want to start things off with some questions, and one that I want to start with is I found something interesting in your after forward when you were sort of reflecting on the feelings of your dad, and when you talked about how when you were younger, you and your brothers, he would tell you the story, and you saw it as more of his pessimistic view of the world and how things were going. But I want to know, can you talk about your thought process and your feelings towards this story as you develop and age and gathered your own view of the world? How did your feelings about your father and his story change from when you were a kid until now?
Oh, that's a great question. I will say that growing up as the son of a Holocaust survivor, I always felt this huge unbridgeable gap between my own life growing up as a kid in the United States and my father's upbringing in a impoverished Chassidic home in Poland, and of course what he went through in the war afterwards. And those things were just so immensely powerful and unrelatable to anything that I had experienced. It was, it was pretty difficult to see um, those stories as a source of optimism, I guess you could say. The process of writing the book was really a deep dive into my father's world and to his perspective. And it opened up a whole new level of understanding for me and being able to, in some way, step into his shoes. And it really kind of reset my relationship with my father, even though he had already passed away some 20 years before.
Yeah, and I asked that question, I opened it with that because this story hasn't only affected you and your generation, it went down into your children. And can you share with our audience the impact of this story with your daughter and just I believe in one interview you talked about how she was going to write the book if you didn't.
So these stories were stories that my father told me when I was growing up as a kid. It's not that he taught me about the Holocaust all the time when I was growing up as a kid. These were stories of his brothers, he and his brothers, and how they did things together to survive and and they were these great heroic stories. And these were also the stories that I told to my kids when they were growing up, because I wanted them to internalize the character traits of brotherhood and tenacity and resilience as family, a family legacy before they started learning about the larger history of the Holocaust in school. So yes, my daughters all related to the stories in different ways, and my one daughter, Orly, started threatening that she was going to write this book herself if I didn't do it. And even she wrote an early version of the Watchmakers for a 7th grade English class. And when my daughters got to a certain age, when I wanted them to hear these stories directly from my father, the same way that I heard them, it was only then that I understood that those tapes that I had of the interviews weren't going to be accessible to them so easily, and I felt like I had to do something. And then my older brother Michael died in 2014, and I got a cold glimpse of my own mortality. And I knew, I felt, I was then in my mid 50s. I felt like it was now or never.
Absolutely. It seems like, okay, we have a bunch of questions coming in. So I'm going to get to those so we can just keep it going. First question, you mentioned you had a sister. What happened to her and what happened to your father?
Okay, so my father had a sister. Her name was Hannah, and what happened to her? So she met a boy from a different town that she wanted to get married to. And the same Polish police captain that saved the lives of my brother, my father and his brothers, he smuggled her in handcuffs to this other town as if she were a prisoner, so she could meet her husband and get married there. She was sent to Treblinka on a train in September 1942 and perished in the war.
Sorry about that. Um, next next question. Thank you for your powerful work. Can you speak about your mother?
So my mother is my mother had my mother grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and so she had her story was not a Holocaust story, except for having married married into the Holocaust, which I'm sure, as they say in Yiddish, was no picnic. But she and my father opened up a jewelry store just a few months before I was born. And my mother was the salesperson. My father was the watchmaker, and that's how they made a living. Uh, and that's how we grew up, working in the store. We as kids would come down and work close to Christmas, and that was that was our life.
All right. Did the family continue in with the watchmaking business post-war, or is this a vocation that has gradually phased out?
So yes, my father continued to be a watchmaker after the war. I guess you could say that watchmaking was like an ark, like Noah's Ark, that carried my father and his brothers through the war and gave them a card that they could play to influence their fate. And to carry the analogy further, when that ark, when the water subsided and that ark landed, it was in the United States, which was this land of unlimited opportunity. Uh, but my father continued to live in that ark and continued to work as a watchmaker. And that was the trade that gave him a way to make a living, gave him a way to get a little piece of the American dream. And I have to say that when I was growing up, my brothers and I looked at that ark and saw it as kind of something from the old world and something that was kind of small and restrictive, and we wanted to explore the larger opportunities that we had from growing up in America. And in the 1960s and 70s, watchmaking did seem like it was a fading trade that was no longer something that was relevant, because people were buying quartz watches and electric watches. Nobody could have imagined that mechanical watches would make such a comeback as they have today. And watchmaking is now kind of a big thing in high demand.
Yeah. Can you discuss how and where you found some of the artifacts?
So by the artifacts, I guess they mean the watchmaking tools that I put on the screen. So I found on the internet a story of this guy named Chaim Stadler, who was a watchmaker who worked in the official watchmaking workshop in Auschwitz. And in that story, they had a photo of some watchmaking tools that he had made in Auschwitz. And I found out that his jewelry store was taken over by his sons and continues to be in business just 20 minutes up the road from where I live. So I contacted them and went to go see these tools and arranged to photograph the tools. So I had the opportunity to do that.
Okay. We have time for a few more. How was your grandfather and his brothers able to come to America?
So it was not my grandfather. It was my father and his brothers, who two of them came to America. My father's and his younger brother. They applied when Harry Truman opened up immigration for Jewish refugees after World War II. And again, on the strength of their watchmaking skills and somebody in the U.S. who had sponsored them to make sure that they wouldn't end up on the welfare rolls, they were able to come to the United States. One other brother who was with them, the other brother who was with them in the concentration camps moved to Paris, France. And there was a fourth brother who escaped to the Soviet side of Poland early in the war. He spent the war in Siberia in a slave labor camp, and he ended up moving to Israel. So I have family in all those places.
All right, Scott, we have 2 minutes left. I want to give you the floor for any closing remarks, anything you would like to say to our audience. Thank everyone. I want to thank you all again for everyone in attendance. Thank you for joining us. Please check out our upcoming programs on our website. I put a link in the chat for us how to contact Scott. We wish we could have got to all your questions, but please submit it to him privately, and he'll get to them. But now the floor is yours, Scott.
Just in closing, I would like to thank everybody for coming. I so much appreciate it. As Raheem mentioned, if you have additional questions, feel free to contact me through my website, which he posted on the comments. If you get a chance to read the book and like it, I would of course be delighted if anybody could write reviews on Amazon or Goodreads or whatever your platform of choice is. Every one of those helps. So thank you again so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott, and everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and you a great evening, Scott.
Okay, thank you, Raheem. I really appreciate it, and thank you to the museum as well.
All right.